Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Rabbi Eric Walker. Our next guest says everything matters because everything is designed to matter. We live lives permeated by legacy. In his book, our next guest offers a glimpse into what matters most, a lifetime of living intentionally for a purpose for the good of others. What you plant today may not sprout for years, but the choices you make now may yield thorns, thistles, and weeds, or they may prove to become the choicest grapes of the most fruitful vineyards. He reminds readers there are no perfect families, no crisis too big that you can't redeem your legacy, and that everything matters. The principal reason for legacy deterioration is a heart disease. The financial legacy is won or lost at the heart level. But he also reminds us that too much focus on financial legacy misses the point altogether. This is one of the reasons we can never separate the cultural legacy from spiritual legacy or financial legacy. They all tie together. The heart is the common denominator. Marriage breeds responsibility. Responsibility births intentionality. Intentionality precedes legacy. He talks about his own wake-up call and explains how disturbances in life need not be catastrophic, but can be instructive. Fight for the hearts of your children. Let them know that you value their souls more than your family wealth. Great legacy presupposes great intentionality. No great legacy vision can survive a non-redemptive atmosphere closed off to grace. Our next guest, David McAlvany, is the CEO of the McAlvany Financial Companies and McAlvany Wealth Management. He's a featured speaker on CNBC, Fox News, Fox Business News, and Bloomberg. He speaks at financial seminars around the world, analyzing major events and their impact on the global economy and financial markets. He can be heard weekly on his market commentary with world leaders, bankers, economists, and renowned investors at www.davidmcalvany.com. Here to talk about his new book, The Intentional Legacy, what you want for your family, why you want it, and how do you get it. I'm very happy to welcome you to meet our next guest, David McAlvany. David, welcome to Revealing the Truth.
Thank you, sir. It's great to be with you today.
It's great to have you here. You know, legacy is something that people think about sometimes a little too late in life, but you know, it's interesting that when we look at the Picassos, when we look at the Rembrandts, when we look at the Monets, we don't ever see a bad one. When you look at the photo album on the coffee table of a family story, you don't see the picture of when Tommy broke that favorite vase that Grandma, it's the only thing we had left from Grandma. But we don't have a picture of that. We don't have a picture of Johnny setting the toilet paper on fire in the trash can and having to gut his bedroom because he was playing with matches. We have an opportunity to write our legacy and present our legacy, not fictitiously, but actually impactfully by change and by embracing the intentionality of legacy. We don't start out. We don't come out of the womb with a legacy mindset. So you didn't come out of the womb with a legacy mindset. Where did your legacy mindset come into play?
Well, clearly, legacy is something that is inescapable as a concept, and we will either leave an ideal legacy or one that perhaps in retrospect we're not too pleased with. And as you mentioned, there is this sense in which maybe you're starting a little late. It's never too late. I would say it's never too late. It doesn't matter if you're 95, 65, 45, or 15. It really is about setting a trajectory. And so from wherever you are today, the question is your highest hopes and greatest ideals. Are you setting a proper trajectory from this moment to that? And there are individual choices that you make which will align those 2 points in time, the present with the future. And so there really is no period of time where you could say it's just too late. You can make choices that make a tremendous difference right now. Your question to me about where it started, There was a wake-up call for me in my teenage years. I grew up in a business family. My dad is an entrepreneur and started a business which required him to travel quite a bit, as much as 3 weeks out of the month. And it essentially was like a single-family home for much of that time frame. And it created a lot of distance between us and a lot of unmet expectations, disappointments, small promises made that because of travel schedule and clients coming to town were sometimes disappointed. And those things in aggregate created sort of relational rupture. And I made choices that ultimately led to me being away from home, running away, and then living at a youth ranch for almost a year in my early teenage years. After that, my father and I found a tremendous amount of redemption and healing in our relationship, but it all began in one moment when we sat at a Waffle House, and when I should have had the book thrown at me, and I deserved for full well the justice and the discipline of a father, he extended me an olive branch. He extended me grace, and it changed my life. That moment at the Waffle House made me think, where am I going? What is this life about? And how can I make a better set of decisions? So there in my early teenage years, we began the process of redemption and healing.
What a wonderful story. Very similar to the prodigal son coming back and being shocked by the response, by the reception that he himself received, which began the redemption of the entire family relationship. There are references to various biblical characters and biblical scenarios in the book and throughout the book. When did faith become a part of the equation for you?
Faith was critical at that point at age 15, and it's the point at which I took ownership of the decision. I mean, I can go back in time to age 7 when perhaps I said a prayer. I know I said a prayer, and there was an invitation. I think I was on, I don't even know if this is a concept, but borrowed faith. I think there was a cultural influence, and growing up in a Christian home, an acceptance of who Jesus was and what this meant. But I think for it to travel from the head to the heart, a very short distance, but a long journey for me, it took until I was 15 to really own that decision, and for grace to be something that I appreciated, not as a concept, but as a reality permeating my life, and something that was a rich, rich offer given from our Heavenly Father.
In retrospect, as you look at your life and as I hear you talking, I'm wondering if all of us have that same kind of encounter where first grace is extended to us before we can really conceptualize the concept of grace. It's one thing to be taught in Vacation Bible or in the synagogue, as I was, or young people in church about this concept of grace, but until you're on the receiving end of not being worthy, not being entitled to being given this unmerited, unwarranted, supernatural gift that is extravagant and stunning and beyond anything you could conceive of. Do we all kind of have to have that encounter to really cross over the line to be able then to understand exactly what God did for us on that day 2,000 years ago?
In some respects, until we have that, we're the practicers of religion, and there's no way for us to really enter into a deep level of gratitude. Gratitude and appreciation comes from that stark recognition of what it is we've been given. And I think you can practice religion for a long, long time without ever reaching an internal place of deep gratitude.
In our walk with the Lord, this grace encounter, this decision made, and then how we live from that point forward is by instruction, by example, to be very intentional. There are assigned roles. One, you are called to a ministry of reconciliation. Two, you're called to be an ambassador of heaven. These are very lofty, very important roles, and that Paul in 2 Corinthians 5:17 talks about that anybody who's in Christ is a new creation. The old is gone, the new has come, and you are called into a ministry of reconciliation, reconciling yourself and man to God, and then into this ambassadorship as an ambassador, as being the very voice of God. This is a heavy promotion without what we would consider to be the prerequisites, that I need the undergraduate study, I need all these things. This is like, listen, if you're a Messiah, man, you're there. That's all you need. And rock and roll, you're an ambassador, you're a minister, you're ordained, go out there and make disciples of men. Is it really that simple, or could it really possibly be that it is that simple?
So with the concept of legacy, I think the emphasis has been so much on the financial and what you leave at the end of your life as a bequest to the next generation, financial resources. And what you've pointed to is that leaving a legacy includes things that have nothing to do with money and are accessible to every human being on the planet. If we are entering into a relationship with Christ and entering into that redemptive process and then living in obedience to become an ambassador and enter into reconciliation, ourselves with God, man with fellow man, this is an important thing to recognize, because legacy is something that begins, and it's not like, oh, well, I have to have $100,000 in my retirement account or $1 million at the end of my life to have left a significant legacy. There's the legacy of a soldier who, exemplifies courage. There's the legacy of the teacher who exemplifies compassion to a student with need. When we dig deep, we find that actually when we measure a balance sheet, when we look at resources and the things that we steward, the list goes so far beyond tangible assets like land and stocks and bonds and ounces of gold or silver. There's a long list of intangibles that we also manage. So the tangible wealth, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but legacy is open to everyone, and you don't have to have physical tangible wealth to impact the world around you. So, what does it mean to cultivate a culture of appreciation and grace and love, and to demonstrate forgiveness and to be a loyal friend? When you're in the context of family, what goes into creating a shared identity and creating a culture of trust? These are resources. These are things that are not going to occur by default. And so the intentionality piece is very important, to say it's not going to happen by accident, but it will happen most likely, or more likely, if we're deliberate about the way we cultivate culture within the family and within our lives. But the point being, as you pointed out, is that legacy is about so much more. And as believers, it does begin with, and our lives are a rich demonstration of God's grace, and the redemptive impact that we're supposed to have in the world begins with managing this expanded balance sheet, if you will. And I'm in the world of wealth management, so I can't help but think in terms of assets and liabilities and dealing with both. We have both. If you look at your own history, as I have mine, I have baggage from earlier generations. I also have intergenerational blessing, and these are resources that we have to look at, analyze, and through God's grace move forward into the next generation, hopefully dropping some of the baggage and promoting and creating more blessing as time goes on.
Not everything we invest in brings us a positive return. We have to learn when to divest as well as when to invest. And it's the same thing with legacy. Nobody's so great as the day that they pass away. Nobody is so wonderful and so saintly as the day of their passing. I've done many, many funerals. The hardest funeral that I had to preach was my own father's funeral, because I had to dig into a pretty deep spot within me to find something that I could harvest, something I could say, something I could realize. And what lesson came out of that was every one of us has the opportunity to choose a singular event that we can point to, one picture in our lives and our experience that we can use to represent. You know, you sit down, you meet somebody, you don't want them to take you from the birth canal, you know, tell me about yourself. Well, you know, I was conceived on a Tuesday, it was rainy, the barometric pressure was 38% humidity level, and you don't want, what you want is you want a snapshot, you want a Polaroid. And so I began to realize I could have my own Polaroid, and that could be the picture I carry in my wallet. I don't carry a whole, you don't unroll this long photo album, you have a picture. Here's a picture of me and my daughter. Okay, one picture, okay, a special moment together. And so I was able to go through and harvest and find that one picture, and that became the story that I told when people said, well, what was your dad like? I could tell that story, and they would say, oh, that sounds like such a great childhood, and I could then relate to that moment as being representative of not having to deny a good childhood, a bad childhood, a hard childhood, a difficult, but just say, yes, it was, because that moment in time was a great moment in time. And so we have that ability. God gives us that ability, and actually that's what He does with us, taking us to the day of salvation, is that He takes all the old stuff and throws it away and forgets it. He throws it as far as it is east to the west. And does that for us, should we not be extending the same? And therefore, as we create both in the natural and the supernatural, this legacy of intentionality of being not just planters, but harvesters of the good and recyclers of the not good, not to poison the earth, but to replenish.
Well, and so much of that looking back is in anticipation of what lies ahead. If you can look back with grace upon the relationship that you have with earlier generations, your father and others, and with gratitude and grace, extend that. You're inviting that into your own future, where you recognize, you know, with all the imperfections, this is a man that I love. And that, I think, sets the standard for, with all of my own imperfections, I hope my children say the same thing. This is the father I loved. And so, you know, that I think is very healthy in the context of creating a culture of grace. You know, in some respects, when you talk about that snapshot, what you're talking about is becoming a curator. Let me think of a way to say it. Perhaps a curator of sentimentality, where for future generations, for your child, your grandchild, or grandchildren, they look back and they say, these are the ways we lived as a family. This is the culture that we had. These were the activities that we shared. These are the memories we had, the books we read, the poetry we shared, the conversations, the lively debates. And all of these become the snapshots. All of these become, and so we know the curator in the work that he or she does in the context of a museum, hanging photos or works of art in a particular way to highlight something in particular. We are the curators of family life, and we are the curators of that future sentimentality. So in some respects, you can look ahead, and just as you would set a trajectory, you can begin to map out some of the things that you hope to be in that pile of pictures. You know, so how do you interact with your kids today? Is it by accident? Are you hoping that something good happens? Or is there a way for you to say, you know, for instance, I turn 50 when my oldest son turns 18. There are some precious moments that I want to capture as I reach a certain critical age and he reaches a certain critical age, conversations that we get to share and a relation of, wow, this is a big deal. And so I look forward to those events, I plan those events, and I am creating future memories through being intentional about looking at this timeline and our shared timelines. And again, what am I interested in becoming? The curator of family culture. And something that ultimately, as my son looks back, as he enters his 30s and 40s and 50s, as he looks back in time, he says, the life that we lived, emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, was so rich. This I want to build on. And he'll iterate, he'll change, he'll do things better. I hope that he does. I hope that he exceeds everything, and the rest of my children too. But that's the point, is for them to look back and cherish, to love, to have created so much buy-in in the process of living family life that they say, I know how rich it is to be a believer. I know how rich it is to live in the redemptive context. I know how rich it is to have embraced and received grace. This is what we get to do in the context of life together. That's beautiful.
You know, typically in life, good judgment is learned through bad experience. We don't learn much when we do something right. We just continue to do that same thing that way, which also means that if we do something right, we can sometimes shut ourselves off to doing something better because it worked. And because it worked, we don't open up ourselves the opportunity to having it work better. So we lock ourselves into a logic or a reason or a reasoning mechanism that shuts us off from a larger funnel, if you will, to produce an outcome which could be much greater. That we understand the funnel concept, we understand input and output, but we're not stuck with the diameter of the output shaft. We can go in and clip it, cut it, we can remove it. We have that power and that authority to do that. I just don't think that we view it that way, and we're not intentional enough about it to say, I don't like the direction this is going in. I don't like what I'm looking at. You're talking about being 50 when your son turns 18. I'll be 85 when my granddaughter turns 18. So I've just begun at this age to the first time I've ever done a 5-year spreadsheet of what 67 through 72 looks like on paper. Where will we go with the network? Where will we go with the ministry? How will we replicate? If we're in 120 countries now, how do we get to the rest of the world? How do we become the streaming, the next Netflix of Christian television? You know, how do we do that and bring people like yourself to the forefront that are maybe over here in the business world, but you have this incredible spirit-filled message that has implications both in the natural and the supernatural? How do we expose the world to that? That's part of our vision, part of our legacy building is headlines. We talk about the news and how it impacts prophecy and what happens biblically. We talk about the heart lines, people's tragedies. I have a guest coming on after you that lost both his legs and one arm in Afghanistan with an IED. The story of their faith and their journey, that's the heart line. And then straight biblical truth, straight biblical teaching, and how do we build on that legacy? And we've just started to look at that from a legacy building perspective. Does that mean you're matured? I think it does. You're maturing. It's part of a maturing process, and a very important one. We're talking with David McAlvany, author of The Intentional Legacy, what you want for your family, why you want it, and how you get there. Faith is a foundational principle of this book, but also understanding intentionality, relationships, roles, grace, and where you are, and having a reasonable assessment of where you are and where you want to go, meaning you have to take the time. You have to be willing to invest first in yourself, to understand where you are, first in your relationship with God, then in your relationship with your family. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to dig into some of these concepts. Concepts about marriage, concepts about maturing, concepts about reverse engineering our responses to crisis. Can we do do-overs? Can we revisit situations? Can we repair parts of our past so that our future is secure? We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back. Not everything that makes the headlines has biblical importance, but many events that happen around the world do, and you never hear about them. Igniting a Nation is pleased to teach Revealing Prophecy every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. at the Marriott 280 in Birmingham. We will cover worldwide events and insider information that will connect the dots of what's happening around the world with biblical prophecy. If you happen to miss a class, we'll televise each week's class at 10 o'clock Central Time on ignitinganation.com and all our social media outlets. Copies of the teachings will also be available to purchase on our website at www.ignitinganation.com. The Lord meets you right where you are, and so does Igniting a Nation's new live streaming outlets. You can now watch Revealing the Truth, Revealing the Bible, and Prophecy Revealed simulcast live each Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 1 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time on YouTube Live, Facebook Live, Vimeo, Periscope, and through our website, www.ignitinganation.com. No matter what device you are using, our program will automatically scale so you won't have to miss a single program. And if you happen to miss an episode, you can always subscribe to the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel and access over 1,000 interviews and never miss your favorite authors, special guests, and topics that interest you the most.
There are lots of ways to see Israel, but nothing compares to seeing the land of the book and the people of the book through the eyes of two Jewish believers who can take you on a journey that will bring the entire Bible to life. When you join Rabbi Eric Walker and his #1 rated tour guide, Edo Canaan, in Israel, you'll experience incredible teachings, first-class accommodations, and actually walk where Jesus walked. You will experience the Bible transforming from black and white into living color, and you will never see the Bible in the same way again. For more information, visit us at www.ignitinganation.com/events.
The Lord contends with what contends with you, and Igniting a Nation is committed to bringing to light each and every issue that faces a believer's life. Our live stream programming and teachings take you on a journey to finding biblical truth from a wide variety of experts who share their insights into a deeper walk with the Lord. We have assembled the most comprehensive panel of experts in the fields of prophecy, caregiving, healing from trauma, shame, and abuse, and so much more. We continue to expand our teachings and programming to meet your needs. We're committed to healing the nations with biblical truth. Visit www.ignitinganation.com to develop a deeper walk with the Lord and start your journey to a transformed life. The Bible commands us to study to show ourselves approved, but most study using Bible study tools and not actually studying the Bible chapter and verse. Igniting a Nation is pleased to present Revealing the Bible, recorded and taught each week before a live audience. We take you deeper into the actual Bible and verse in both Hebrew and English, and connect the dots between the Old and New Testament. You can attend our 2 classes in Tuscaloosa and Birmingham, or watch the program every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Central Time on ignitinganation.com and all our other simulcast outlets. For more information, visit www.ignitinganation.com/events. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with David McAlvany, author of The Intentional Legacy: What You Want for Your Family, Why You Want It, and How You Get There. David, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, sir. Great to be back.
David, in your life and in my life, we had difficult relationships with our fathers. Mine was an Eastern European living in what was considered, I was part of the first post-Holocaust generation. We were completely different. American-born children, entirely different than our Eastern European counterparts. Worlds, globes, galaxies apart. There were language barriers. There were societal barriers. And I was definitely not. It was like I wasn't supposed to be a part of this family, and felt that way from the very beginning. And so wound up leaving it. And here it is, 53 years later, and never really returned back home. Still 53 years, every Sunday morning at 11 a.m. I call my mother, and have for 53 years, every Sunday morning at 11 a.m. I call my mother. She's 93, and we have the Sunday morning call, as was our tradition when I went away to school, and it's been that tradition for 53 years, and we've maintained that. Great love. Don't see each other that often, but still have that great love for each other. So that is a legacy of a sort, that there's a great relationship, even in birthed out of difficulty. And a lot of times some of the best relationships are built out of difficulty. So in your looking at the intentional legacy, strife or difficult times are not necessarily a negative factor. They can actually be a catalyst to something quite positive. How does that work?
Well, so in the book, I describe these issues as disturbances, things that we wouldn't necessarily invite, but they do occur. And to pretend that they don't is to kind of ignore parts of life that, whether it's health issues or job loss or moral failure or the tragic loss of a loved one. In other parts of the world, there's persecution. Certainly, if you go back to the global financial crisis, you've got market crashes. These are things which no one invites, but you have to deal with. And so this comes back to a question of culture. How do you deal with these issues of disturbance? And again, I think of something that I start with my kids at a very young age. Saturdays during the wintertime, we live in Colorado, and we'll go skiing. And when they fall down, my question to them is always, what do you do when you fall down? And their answer is, we get back up again. And there's this idea that McAlvany's never quit. We never quit. If you've fallen down, get back up again. You have over and over again imperfections through biblical characters, people included in the Hall of Faith in Hebrews, that you would say, wow, I've dug into their biographies. They're anything but saint-like. And yet somehow God sees them for their truest hearts. And that's not to say that they didn't have foibles and they didn't have difficulties and they didn't fall down. But in many instances, you see that they simply got back up again. When I look at disturbance, I think of the kinds of crises that either emerge because problems have been ignored, and this is a little bit like deferred maintenance on a vehicle. You can ignore it and ignore it and ignore it, and finally the engine blows up. That's one kind of crisis. But I think in many instances, crisis is preparation for the next crisis, where you are getting stronger, you are gaining wisdom, you are gleaning insight, and you are better able to bear. You can bear a larger burden. Your shoulders are widened, so to say. And actually, I think in many instances, crisis or disturbance can be opportunity in disguise. Clearly, from a market standpoint, I see that from a value. Things get cheap only in the midst of crisis, and we know that you buy low and sell high if you ever want to make money in the financial markets. But I also, from my own family experience, have seen again how if you take preparation seriously, you can allow, instead of for crisis to be destructive in the family, it can be constructive. My wife was diagnosed with cancer in our fourth year of marriage. We've been married almost 20 years now. And it was our opportunity to come together. It was our opportunity to lean on each other. It was our opportunity to discover a deeper level of love and commitment in our relationship. And what we worked through in that period of time has been invaluable to a deepened relationship. Now, I've also seen families who've gone similar types of crises, and the stress and strain of it all becomes that which tears apart a family. And so, again, there is a question of how do you respond to crisis? If there's deep financial loss, is it a finger wagging? Is it a blame game? Do you sort of tear each other apart? Or are you constantly keeping in mind that hope and redemption are themes that need to be infused within the family? And are you taking that opportunity to find how God can redeem a very difficult situation? I think that's the way I tend to approach the idea of crisis and disturbance.
In shepherding the heart of your wife and shepherding the hearts of your children, we're all fallible. We all say, do, respond in the moment at times. How important is it for us to go back and revisit, as you say, reverse engineer our response to crisis?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that can be learned. I keep a journal which shows me, and this is again because I'm in the wealth management business, we actively manage accounts every day, and we do want to track the wins and why we won, the losses and why we lost, because if we don't learn from these things, they're not duplicatable on the positive side or avoidable on the negative side. So there has to be an openness to this kind of transparency, where I'm not running from failure. I recognize that failure is a part of life. I cannot get everything right. I will not get everything right, but I must learn from the mistakes that I make. And this is true in our family life too. Some Wednesdays we have family meetings, and we'll talk about what's working and what's not working. And this is not an opportunity for public shaming, not at all. This is an invitation for transparency, and in many instances, it comes down to, Mom, I really feel like this needed to be different, or Dad, I really would appreciate if you didn't say it that way. And it's an opportunity for us to say, you know what, this refinement is so necessary. If our relationships are going to grow deeper, these are hindrances which have to be removed. These are obstacles to intimacy which have to be addressed. And so that candor and that transparency is so important in the engineering process as well as the reverse engineering. Some of the concept of reverse engineering does tie to that idea of trajectory setting. If you want to fast forward to being let's say your mother's age in her 90s, and look back at your life and say, I'm glad that I did this, and I'm this, and this, and this. You can do that now at age 23 or 33 or 53 or whatever, and in that imaginative process say, what needs to be put in motion today to be there? That to me is a form of reverse engineering. Reverse engineering a sequence of events which starts with something very, very small. So when we talk about legacy, we're talking about the sum total of values and of culture and of the aggregate of choices. This is why every little choice you make matters, because in aggregate, it is a reflection of your values and your culture, and it is, in fact, trajectory setting. So this is, I think, the importance of reverse engineering.
In the book, you talk about experiences, and as we allow our children to experience various things, you state that experience informs or really helps stimulate intellectual curiosity. It's a way of helping our children tap into things they weren't aware that they were interested in. There's a lot of structure in a lot of families that they wind up having to be interested in what mom and dad are interested in because that's the way the environment is set up. But you talk about legacy building, that each one of the members of the family is also building their own legacy, and you are a contributor to it in a positive way, you're a contributor to it in a negative way, you are a barrier in some ways, and you are a facilitator in some ways. How important is it for us to examine our role in how we're empowering or equipping our spouse, our children, our friends, our family, to become legacy builders and to stimulate curiosity into things they had not considered before?
Rabbi, you had this experience previously as a director for Fortune 50 companies, and so within the corporate boardroom, you know that there are leadership issues and succession issues which have to be addressed, and the best leader is a leader who looks ahead and says, I have to be finding and cultivating and mentoring my replacement. For continuity's sake, I have to become replaceable. I can't be the center of attention here. And sometimes within a matriarchy or patriarchy, or within a family construct, the lead, let's say that I create a business and create $1 billion. Somehow I assume that I'm the one and it's my view of everything that must be perpetuated through time. Well, the problem is you create such value in one person and focus so much on one person that you forget that the next generation has to be prepared to be in that leadership role. And it has to become about them, not about you. So this idea of experience is so critical because what you're doing is you're mentoring. You are creating the next generation of leaders to be able to lead as well as you have and hopefully even better than you have. So there's a generosity in the context of training your children, which is I'm preparing you for life, and I'm preparing you to succeed me in every possible way. Like the boardroom, this is a mentorship process where ultimately you step back and say, it's no longer about me. You've been prepared. You can do this. And that process of experience includes failure. So this is where, again, in the context of family, what a perfect place where with grace and with transparency, when things don't turn out the way you hoped, that's okay. That's okay. Because there is a vision of redemption, which, if infused into the family, says we're all in a process of maturation and growth, and this is a part of it. We need to learn and grow. And that's where, whether it's making financial mistakes or moral mistakes, I would much rather see my sons and daughters make those small moral mistakes now and have a positive and constructive conversation around them so that as they enter adulthood are no longer under my roof, they know how to handle this. And like David, he fell and he got back up again. They've learned from a young age, don't turn your back to God. As the Jewish people so many times did in the Old Testament, where they forgot God and they forgot God and they forgot God. The importance of remembrance stones, the importance of cherishing the ways that God had brought redemption and healing to the Jewish people. This is what I hope they launch with, and I think so many of those experiences are opportunities for us in the home.
As you've practiced these concepts of legacy building in your own family, what are some of the moments where you've heard or observed that kind of clicked with you to say, oh, this is actually working? Or what they just said made me realize that the investment that I'm making is actually yielding a return?
I was leaving for a business trip, and my daughter runs up and grabs my leg, and she says something to me that it just absolutely floors me. Our tradition is this. I'll wake up in the morning and I'll go into her bedroom, scoop her up out of bed, and go downstairs, and she sits on the countertop, and we have a spoonful of honey. And it's about 5 minutes of time every morning, and it's not much time. It's just a little thing, but it's how we start our day. And what she said to me as I was leaving on this business trip is, Dad, I'm not having honey until you get back. And what it communicated to me was this deep understanding. Although she doesn't have the vocabulary for something like solidarity, she understands it. She understands that what we share is a connection and time spent. And this is where I think all of a sudden legacy becomes very clear. It's about the little things. You don't have to plan on a grand scale if you're willing to make small choices each day, each week, each month. These little things have an imprint on the lives around us, and I think this is one of the most crystal clear stories I can think of. It was just a spoonful of honey.
In marriage, I did a lot of marriage counseling when I was a congregational leader, and I used to make the statement quite often, sometimes you hear from the Lord and he sounds just like your wife. We tend to look at marriage, many different ways, but you talk in the book that marriage matures a man. It refines a man. It clarifies and qualifies a man. How so?
So in singleness, it's obviously easy to focus on your own needs and wants. And prior to marriage, I'm not saying that's inappropriate. It's just a part of life. It's the way we can, in fact, orient our lives just to self. And the process of marriage, for me at least, was a process of discovering ways in which I was very self-centered, very self-oriented, and neglected the needs of the other, whoever the other may be. So marriage is this process of unpacking the inward curvature towards the self, and I think it even becomes more real with children, because there's so many needs that they have that cannot be met except by you for certain periods of time, and it requires you to prioritize them even more than yourself, and actually put away your needs and wants and subjugate them to the priorities of others. So that process of maturity, I think is what I've experienced as a part of marriage, as a part of being a father, and I think it's an important part of maturity. I think you could probably mature in those ways without marriage, and without having children. It just would require that much more intentionality to enter into a life of service and awareness of other people.
In raising children and building a legacy, we also look in Scripture at things like generational curses or generational circumstances that pop up. Our kids aren't in a bubble. They get to visit grandma and grandpa. They get to visit aunts and uncles. They get to visit friends and family. And every now and then they come home and you hear something that you don't exactly want to hear. It kind of takes you back to a place in time you thought was gone. How do you deal with that? How in the legacy, how in the shepherding of the heart of the children in legacy building, do these generational errors or patterns get broken?
I think the prerequisites for dealing with generational baggage is the infusion of grace and of forgiveness. And when those elements are there, then transparency can be as well. But without grace and forgiveness, transparency is not something that can become a dynamic within the home, because everyone understands that the first moment that you are transparent is the first moment you're thrown under the bus, the first moment you're thrown out of the family, the first moment that you're, basically, life gets more difficult the more honest you are if you don't live in a context of grace and charity. So those are prerequisites. I like to say that the problem with baggage is that it affects other people's trips, and it is important to deal with baggage, but it has to be done in a way that is again, I think full of grace and mercy. To have received baggage from the past is something that I think is kind of inevitable. How we handle it is really important. I mean, what is baggage? It could be anything that's negative, unredeemed, unhealed, or burdensome that's passed from one generation to the next. That could be unresolved hurt or grief. It could come from conflict. It could come from abuse or neglect or addiction. It could be something as practical as financial debts or physiological or psychological proclivities from earlier generations. It could be something like lies that we've believed about ourselves or about others. Disappointed expectations, as I talked about in terms of the relationship that I had with my father. And again, charity is a part of this issue. What do you want to cultivate? What resources do you want to become a part of your legacy? If you don't adopt charity and grace, transparency can never be in the picture, and transparency is something that allows for the conversation, both embracing the past for what it is, and recognizing the liabilities that it may create. But from that point forward, you can say, and where do we go from here? Because the point is not to just sort of flog the past like some dead horse, but it is to say, where are we going from here? And can we do so in a way that is healthy for our relationships? So that's in a nutshell.
At the end of your book, you have a summation with 10 key takeaways about legacy. We've got about a minute and a half. Of those 10, what do you think maybe are two that the rest hinge upon?
I think it boils down to the last one that I list there, just as you can boil down all the law and the prophets into love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. I think you can do the same with these 10 principles and say, if you infuse hope and redemption into your family culture, these are things that will be defining factors in the trajectory that you set, in the relationships that you're engaged with, in the way that you speak to other people, relate to other people, and what you want for your family and how you get there.
Well, incredible wisdom contained in the pages of this new book, The Intentional Legacy by David McAlvany. What you want for your family, why you want it, and how you get there. You can visit him at davidmcalvany.com. Great insights about building legacy, both for your personal life, your financial life, and how you can change the trajectory of your life and your family's life by being intentional. David McAlvany, thank you for joining us here on Revealing the Truth.
Thank you, Rabbi Eric. It was a pleasure.
God bless, my friend. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.